A single color once held more power than armies or gold. The story of Roman dye-making is a hidden history of ancient prestige, where the secrets of color dictated who ruled and who served. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a tiny sea snail shaped the fate of an empire. We will uncover why a dye could be worth its weight in solid gold and how its foul stench was a symbol of ultimate luxury. What is the first color you associate with true power? In the heart of Rome, the clothes you wore were a public declaration of your place in the world. A senator's toga wasn't just a garment, it was a walking billboard of his authority, and its color was the most important part of the message. The most coveted of all was a deep, rich purple, a color so exclusive it was legally reserved for the emperor and the highest-ranking generals celebrating a triumph. To wear it without permission was an act of treason, a direct challenge to the state itself, but the elite's palette of power extended beyond imperial purple. Senators broadcast their status with the broad crimson stripe on their togas, a scarlet-red dye that signified their lofty political rank. Priests and vestal virgins wore pure white, a symbol of sanctity and purity. And for those wealthy enough to flaunt their fortune, saffron yellow, derived from the delicate stigmas of thousands of crocus flowers, was the ultimate display of disposable income. Each of these colors carried a profound cultural weight. They weren't just about aesthetics, they were a language of prestige, woven directly into the fabric of society. This insatiable demand for vibrant, color-fast dyes, ones that would not fade in the sun or wash out, is what transformed dye making from a simple craft into a highly guarded, industrial-scale secret. The pursuit of the perfect hue became a driving force of innovation, creating a world of luxury that defined Roman identity for centuries. This legendary purple did not come from a plant or a mineral, but from the sea. The source was the Murex snail, a small creature whose hypobranchial gland held a secret. When harvested, this gland produced a milky liquid that was anything but purple. It was initially a pale, yellowish mucus. The true magic, the transformation into that coveted deep violet, happened only after exposure to sunlight and air. It was a slow alchemical reaction, turning something mundane into a shade of power. The process of creating Tyrian purple was as grueling as it was miraculous. To yield just a single gram of dye required the laborious collection and processing of up to 12,000 individual snails. Each one had to be carefully cracked open by hand to extract that precious gland. The sheer scale of this operation is almost unimaginable. Vast mounds of discarded shells have been found at ancient production sites, literal mountains of waste testifying to an insatiable imperial demand. Can you picture the scene, the smell of rotting shellfish mingling with the hope of a royal fortune? This was not a pleasant craft. The stench from the vats of decomposing snails was so overwhelmingly foul that dye workshops were always located downwind of cities. Yet for the Romans, this terrible odor was the perfume of ultimate prestige. They did not invent this dye, however. Its story begins centuries earlier with the Phoenicians, master traders of the ancient world who first discovered and commercialized the secret. They became so synonymous with the color that their name is derived from the Greek word for purple. The Romans, recognizing a symbol of supreme authority when they saw one, adopted the dye and industrialized its production. They seized control of the prime harvesting grounds and turned dye-making into a state-controlled monopoly. The result was a color so expensive it was literally worth more than gold, weight for weight. Its use was restricted by law to the highest echelons of power. Only the emperor could wear a toga entirely dyed in this purple. Senators might have a narrow purple stripe on their garments, but to wear a full robe of Tyrian purple without explicit permission was not just a fashion crime. It was an act of treason, a direct challenge to the emperor's authority that could be punished by death. The color itself had become the state, but how did such a delicate biological process survive on an industrial scale? The answer lies in the ruthless efficiency of a Roman operation that treated these tiny snails like a precious mineral, extracting every last drop of value. Two specific species of sea snail held the key to this imperial treasure. The Murex brandaris and the Murex trunculus were the living vessels of purple, found in the clear, shallow waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Each snail possessed a unique biological secret, a tiny organ called the hypobranchial gland. This gland did not contain purple dye, not yet. Instead, it held a clear, mucus-like precursor. The real challenge began with the extraction. Workers had to carefully crack open the snail's hard, spiny shell without crushing the precious gland inside. It was a delicate, painstaking process, demanding skilled hands and a strong stomach. The moment the gland was exposed, the notorious stench began its work, a pungent odor that clung to everything and everyone involved. This was not a simple matter of squeezing out a colorful liquid. The harvested glands were then soaked in salt vats for days. Only after this putrid soaking and then exposure to sunlight and air would the chemical miracle occur. The liquid would slowly shift through a spectrum of colors, finally settling into that legendary, stable purple. The entire operation was dictated by nature's schedule. Snail harvesting was a seasonal trade, limited to the colder months when the creatures were most plentiful and their glands were richest in the dye precursor. Geography was everything. Entire towns sprang up along coastlines with the right rocky seabeds where these snails thrived. Communities were built entirely around the rhythm of the harvest, the stench of the vats, and the promise of wealth. This created a specialized, labor-intensive economy where a man's skill with a shellfish knife could determine his family's fortune. Can you hear the sounds of such a place, the constant tapping of hammers on shell, the slosh of vats, the chatter of a workforce dedicated to transforming stinking mucus into the ultimate symbol of power? The value chain was immense, from the diver who braved the cold sea, to the breaker who expertly opened the shells, to the dyer who mastered the finicky fermentation. This was an ancient industrial complex, all dedicated to coloring the hems of the most powerful men in the world. But with such immense value locked in a living creature, how could the Romans possibly control it? That milky liquid, fresh from the snail, was utterly unremarkable. The true magic, the transformation into a color worth more than gold, happened next. This was not a simple dye bath, it was a carefully controlled fermentation. The extracted glands were placed into large lead vats filled with salted water, then left to bake under the Mediterranean sun for days. Inside those vats, a silent alchemy took place. Bacteria began their work, breaking down the snail tissues and initiating a complex chemical reaction. The liquid would slowly change, shifting through a spectrum of colors from green to blue and finally to that legendary purple. The entire process relied on the dyer's deep, experiential knowledge. There was no precise timer or thermometer. The master dyer judged the progress by the color and the smell, knowing exactly when to pull the dye to achieve the desired shade. A shorter fermentation might yield a reddish purple, prized for its warmth. Left longer, it would deepen into a rich, almost blackish violet, the color of imperial power. This was a secret passed down through generations, a trial and error wisdom that was as valuable as the dye itself. These workshops were not places of beauty. They were functional industrial sites, almost always built on the edges of towns, positioned carefully downwind. The stench of rotting shellfish and the metallic tang of the fermenting vats created a cloud of odor that could be smelled for miles. For the artisans who worked there, this foul perfume was the smell of their livelihood. They were the guardians of an alchemical secret, transforming the most repulsive of substances into the ultimate symbol of splendor. Can you grasp the irony that the foundation of Roman visual grandeur was a smell so offensive if it had to be kept far from polite society? The secret was not just in the snail, but in the slow, stinking dance between sunlight, salt, and time. Yet for every emperor in his deep violet robe, there was a soldier in a red tunic and a merchant's wife in a saffron yellow shawl. The story of Roman color is far more than a single shade of purple. It is a vast spectrum, each hue pulled from the earth and the sea through ingenuity and effort. While Tyrian purple symbolized ultimate power, the vibrant reds, sunny yellows, and rich blues that filled the Roman world came from more accessible, but no less fascinating, sources. Madder root was the backbone of Roman red. This humble plant, grown in fields rather than harvested from the sea, produced a range of warm reds and oranges. But getting color from its gnarled roots was a chemical puzzle. The roots had to be dried, crushed, and then fermented in a precise alkaline solution, often stale urine, to release their rich pigment. The resulting dye was famous for its durability, coloring the wool for military tunics and the borders of everyday clothing. It was the color of practical life and martial pride, a world away from the royal purple's exclusivity. For brilliant yellows, the Romans turned to weld, a common flowering plant. The entire color secret lay not in its roots, but in its stalks and leaves. These were harvested, dried, and then ground into a powder that could be dissolved in hot water to create a stunning, light-fast yellow dye. Because weld was easy to cultivate, its yellow became the color of choice for many, from the veils of brides to the decorative trims in wealthier homes. But the most coveted yellow came from across the empire. Saffron, made from the minute stigmas of the crocus flower, was astronomically expensive. It took over 70,000 flowers to produce just a single pound of dye, making a garment of pure saffron yellow a billboard of immense personal wealth. Then there was the enigmatic blue, derived primarily from woad, a plant related to cabbage. The process to unlock its blue pigment was a true test of a dyer's skill. The woad leaves were first crushed into a paste and dried into hard cakes. To dye cloth, these cakes had to be dissolved in a special fermentation vat. The cloth, when first pulled from this vat, would not be blue, but a disappointing yellow-green. Only upon contact with the air would oxidation work its magic, slowly transforming the fibers to a steadfast blue. This was the color used for the clothing of commoners and the decorative elements in art, a durable and reliable shade for daily life. So while the imperial purple commanded awe from a distance, the true color of Roman society was a complex tapestry woven from madder red, weld yellow, and woad blue. Each dye, whether from a root, a leaf, or a flower, held its own secret recipe, its own place in the social order, and its own story in the vibrant world of Rome. This vibrant world of color was also a world of strict control and immense profit. The Roman state quickly realized that dye was not just a pigment, it was a form of currency. To wear a specific color was to display your wealth and status, and the empire decided to tax that display at every single step. The production of Tyrian purple became an imperial monopoly. The state owned the prime snail beds, controlled the workshops, and employed the artisans directly. Wearing this specific purple without permission was not just illegal, it was a direct theft from the emperor's personal treasury. But the economic web stretched far beyond the imperial purple. For every other major dye, from madder red to saffron yellow, the Roman government imposed heavy taxes and tariffs. A dye workshop was a license to print money, and the state made sure it got its share. Every step of the process was taxed, from the import of raw materials to the final sale of the dyed cloth. This constant flow of revenue from color helped fund the legions, build aqueducts, and sustain the vast Roman bureaucracy. The empire's thirst for dye created sprawling international trade routes. Ships carried precious Murex snails from the coast of modern-day Lebanon. Madder root was cultivated on massive farms in Gaul, and the most expensive saffron was imported from as far away as Greece and Asia Minor. Can you visualize the trade networks, the merchants haggling over sacks of dried roots and cakes of fermented dye, all moving across the known world to satisfy Rome's demand for color? With such high value and heavy taxation, a thriving black market was inevitable. Smugglers would traffic in illegally harvested snails or clandestinely dyed cloth, offering a chance for the aspiring rich to flout the sumptuary laws that dictated who could wear what. This illicit trade in color was a dangerous game, but the potential rewards were enormous. The corruption went even deeper. Political factions and powerful families would secretly vie for control over key dye sources. Espionage was common, with agents sent to steal master dyers' secret recipes or to sabotage a rival's production vats. The secret to a perfect red or a steadfast blue could be worth a fortune, and the power to control that secret could elevate an entire family to new heights of influence. The color on a Roman's back was the end result of a complex global economy, a system of state control, and a shadowy world of smuggling and political intrigue, all swirling together in a single brilliant hue. Step inside one of these workshops and your senses will be overwhelmed. The air itself was thick, a heavy mixture of steam, the sharp tang of fermenting shellfish, and the acrid sting of stale urine used as a mordant. These were not delicate artist studios, they were loud, bustling factories dedicated to the industrial-scale production of color. The layout was strictly functional, organized for maximum efficiency in a messy and demanding process. At the heart of the operation stood rows of large lead vats, some sunk into the ground, others built atop brick furnaces. These were the cauldrons of alchemy, where dyes were born from slow fermentation or constant, carefully controlled heat. Nearby you would find heavy stone mortars and grinding tables, stained with every color imaginable, where roots and plants were pounded into usable paste. The workforce was a hierarchy of labor. At the bottom were the slaves, performing the most back-breaking and dangerous tasks. They stoked the fires, hauled the heavy vats of dye, and stirred the foul-smelling mixtures with long poles. Their hands were often raw, their lungs damaged by the constant inhalation of toxic fumes. Above them worked skilled freedmen and specialized artisans. These were the master dyers, the true guardians of the craft. They possessed the secret knowledge, passed from one generation to the next, of exactly when to add salt, how to judge the pH of a vat by its smell, and the precise moment to pull a cloth to achieve the perfect shade. Their skill determined the financial success or failure of the entire enterprise. The physical toll was immense. Repetitive strain injuries from grinding and stirring were common. The risk of burns from hot vats and scalding liquids was a constant danger. And then there were the invisible threats, the toxic metallic compounds and fumes that led to chronic illness over a lifetime of work. This is why these workshops were almost always exiled to the edges of town, nestled in the industrial districts alongside tanneries and pottery kilns. Their location was a practical necessity, a way to manage the pervasive stench and the mountains of waste, the crushed shells and spent plant matter that were simply part of doing business. Can you see the stark contrast? The men and women laboring in these difficult, malodorous conditions to produce the very colors that would adorn the clean, perfumed elites in the city center. They were the invisible engine of Roman splendor, their hands stained so that the powerful could wear their status without a blemish. The true alchemists of this vibrant empire were not the emperors who wore the colors, but the hands that made them. Within the stifling heat and reek of the dye workshop, enslaved individuals and skilled freedmen held the empire's most precious secrets in their minds and their muscle memory. Their lives were defined by a relentless physical labor that was as dangerous as it was essential. While stirring vast, steaming vats of fermenting murex, they risked burns and inhaled toxic fumes. Their hands, cracked and stained from handling corrosive mordants and crushing madder root, told a story of toil that never appeared on a finished purple robe. This was a world of strict hierarchy where the value of a man was measured by his knowledge. At the bottom, unskilled slaves performed the brute work, hauling water, stoking fires, and disposing of the mountains of rotting organic waste. But a slave with a sharp mind and a deft touch could rise, a worker who learned to judge the exact moment a dye bath reached its perfect hue, or who mastered the delicate process of fermenting woad, became an invaluable asset. This specialized knowledge was a form of power, the one key that could possibly unlock their chains. For a truly exceptional dyer, manumission was a real, if rare, possibility. A master artisan, even if born into slavery, could be worth his weight in gold to his owner. Granting him freedom in exchange for a contractual agreement to continue his work was a shrewd business decision. It created a loyal, highly skilled freedman whose expertise would continue to generate wealth. This created a complex social dynamic within the workshop walls. The master dyer, whether slave or freed, was the guardian of an oral tradition. Recipes were not written down, they were memorized through years of apprenticeship. The precise temperature for a madder bath, the exact salt-to-water ratio for the murex vat, the secret ingredient to make a blue more vibrant, these were secrets passed from one generation of artisans to the next in whispers and demonstrations. This was how the craft protected itself. Betraying these secrets was not just a breach of trust, it was an economic crime that threatened the entire enterprise. The punishment could be severe, from brutal beatings to being sold off to a far worse fate in the mines. This culture of secrecy ensured that the techniques for creating the most valuable colors remained within tightly controlled circles, protecting a monopoly built on human skill and suffering. So the next time you picture a Roman emperor in his brilliant purple, remember the unseen artisan, his lungs scarred by fumes, whose hard-won knowledge made that spectacle possible. That exclusive purple robe was more than a personal luxury, it was a walking piece of legislation. The Roman state understood that to control the color was to control the very image of power itself. This led to the creation of sumptuary laws, a complex legal framework designed to dictate who could wear what color and in what quantity. The most famous of these restrictions reserved the full, solid purple of Tyrian dye for the emperor alone. For anyone else to wear a toga dyed entirely in this hue was not merely a fashion misstep, it was an act of treason, a direct visual challenge to the emperor's supreme authority. The penalty for such a brazen act could be confiscation of property, exile, or even execution. Even those of high rank had to navigate a minefield of color codes. A senator could adorn his toga with a broad purple stripe, but the width and shade were precisely specified by law. Wearing a stripe that was too wide or a purple that was too deep was a dangerous display of ambition that could attract the wrong kind of attention from the emperor's spies. The state's obsession with controlling color extended deep into the economy. Emperor Diocletian, in his famous edict on maximum prices issued in the year 301, did not just cap the cost of grain or wine. He specifically fixed the price of Tyrian purple dye at an astonishingly high level, literally valuing it weight for weight against solid gold. This was not just an attempt to curb inflation, it was a declaration that this particular color was a commodity of state, its value and distribution too important to be left to the free market. Enforcement of these laws was a constant battle. Informants were paid to report neighbors who flaunted illegal hues, and magistrates were tasked with inspecting the clothing of the wealthy for any sign of a forbidden shade. Can you picture the subtle tension at a public gathering where a man's choice of cloak could either affirm his loyalty or mark him as a potential rival? The goal was absolute clarity. In a crowded forum, across a bustling marketplace, or in the Senate House itself, a single glance should tell you exactly who held power. The Roman elite did not want a society where anyone could buy the appearance of status. They built a world where the law itself was woven into the fabric, a visible and enforceable hierarchy in brilliant, bloody, and imperial color. The Roman dyer did not need a laboratory to be a brilliant chemist. His workshop was his lab, and his knowledge was built on generations of trial and error. While he had no concept of molecules or pH levels, he possessed a deep, practical understanding of the chemical reactions needed to bind color to cloth. The single most important discovery in this ancient chemistry was the mordant. A mordant is a substance that acts as a molecular bridge, creating a permanent bond between the dye and the fabric fibers. Without it, even the most vibrant purple would wash out in the first rain, fading to a dull, disappointing stain. The Romans became masters of this invisible art. Their most common mordant was alum, a crystalline salt mined from the earth. They knew that by first soaking wool in an alum solution, the dye would grip the fibers with incredible tenacity, resulting in a color that could withstand sun and washing for years. But their chemical toolkit did not stop there. They experimented fiercely, using ferrous sulfate to darken and sadden colors, or tin salts to produce exceptionally bright, almost shocking hues. They even used common, everyday substances, discovering that stale urine, rich in ammonia, could act as a potent alkaline mordant for certain dyes like madder root, helping to release its full red potential. This was not abstract science, it was a hands-on pursuit of permanence and variety, driven by the demands of the market. Our clearest window into this empirical knowledge comes from the writings of Pliny the Elder. In his monumental work, Natural History, he dedicated entire chapters to the sources and preparation of dyes. He meticulously recorded recipes, detailing how many pounds of madder root to use for a certain shade of red, or the precise steps for fermenting the Murex snail. His texts are a treasure trove, providing a direct link to the dyer's craft, yet these same texts are also filled with errors and deliberate obfuscation. Pliny might accurately describe a dye process, only to follow it with a wild claim that the best purple comes from snails collected at a specific phase of the moon. These myths were not necessarily a sign of ignorance. They served a purpose, protecting the trade secrets of a hugely profitable industry by shrouding the core techniques in a layer of mystical nonsense. How could a rival replicate your success if the recipe required a secret ingredient known only to your guild, or a ritual only performed under a full moon? The real chemistry was happening in the vats, a legacy of unwritten knowledge held in the hands and minds of the artisans who turned stinking mucus and common roots into the enduring colors of an empire. The secrets locked in silent vats and broken pottery are finally speaking. For centuries, the reality of Roman dye making was known only from texts, but archaeology has now given those words a physical form. At sites like Pompeii, preserved under volcanic ash, and Leptis Magna on the North African coast, excavations have uncovered the industrial heart of the color trade. We can walk through the ruins of these workshops and see the very layered vats where the legendary purple fermented, their interiors still stained with faint, shadowy discolorations after 2,000 years. These are not just ruins, they are crime scenes of industry, and the evidence is everywhere. Scattered across these sites are the humble tools of the trade, heavy stone mortars stained with the dust of crushed madder root, and ceramic sherds caked with the residue of ancient dye baths. It is from these unassuming fragments that the most startling truths have emerged. Modern scientists use a technique called mass spectrometry to analyze these residues, a process that identifies the unique chemical fingerprints of the original ingredients. A stain on a potsherd is no longer just a stain, it is a data point. Through this analysis, we can confirm that a particular vat indeed held Murex snail dye, and we can even detect the specific mordants like alum or tin that were used to fix the color to the fabric. This chemical detective work does more than just confirm what Pliny the Elder wrote. It reveals the local variations, the original recipes that were never recorded in any book. A dye workshop in Roman Britain might have used a slightly different fermentation process for woad blue than a workshop in Egypt, adapting to local materials and traditions. The physical layout of these sites tells its own story. The positioning of vats for different stages of production, the drainage channels for wastewater, and the piles of crushed Murex shells all map out an efficient, almost brutal industrial process. Can you hear the echoes in these silent stone vats, the slosh of liquid, the crack of shells, the shouts of workers who turned raw, stinking materials into empire-wide prestige? These archaeological findings are the ultimate confirmation, pulling back the curtain on the gritty, complex, and brilliant reality behind the brilliant colors. That brilliant color came at a terrible hidden cost. The sheer scale of Roman dye production left deep scars on the Mediterranean landscape, scars we can still trace today. The most immediate casualty was the Murex snail itself. Entire coastlines were systematically stripped of these creatures to feed the empire's endless demand for purple. We know this from archaeology, from the colossal middens, the ancient garbage dumps, filled with millions upon millions of broken shells. These are not small piles, they are literal mountains of waste, silent testimony to an industry that harvested a living species to the very brink of extinction in many regions. Can any population withstand such relentless pressure? The answer, echoing from those shell mounds, is a clear and sobering no. The snails in the most accessible coastal waters were wiped out, forcing harvesters to sail farther and dive deeper, increasing costs and risks in a desperate search for a dwindling resource. This was an ancient version of overfishing, a classic tragedy of the commons where a shared resource was consumed without thought for the future. But the damage did not stop at the shoreline. Behind every workshop was a trail of chemical pollution. The runoff from these facilities was a toxic cocktail. Imagine the wastewater, laced with decomposing organic matter from thousands of snails, heavy metals like lead from the vats, and the corrosive residues of mordants like alum and fermented urine. This contaminated slurry was often channeled directly into nearby rivers or simply allowed to seep into the groundwater, poisoning local water supplies for miles downstream. And then there was the air. The infamous stench of the dye works was more than just an unpleasant odor. It was a sign of a profoundly polluted atmosphere. The constant, acrid fumes from fermenting vats and boiling dye pots created a haze that damaged the lungs of workers and likely blighted the vegetation in the immediate area. How did the Romans themselves view this devastation? There is little evidence they saw it as an ecological crisis in the way we do today. For them, the smell and the waste were simply the unavoidable byproducts of a vital and profitable industry, the price of prestige. Their primary concern was pragmatic, not environmental. There are records of officials complaining about the stench from dye works located too close to wealthy urban neighborhoods, leading to regulations about where they could be built, but these were laws about nuisance, not conservation. The idea of replenishing the snail beds or managing the harvest sustainably seems to have been foreign to the Roman mindset. The resource was there to be used, and its depletion was a problem for a future generation. This relentless pursuit of a single color, with its toxic legacy and resource depletion, feels hauntingly familiar. It stands as an ancient mirror to our own industrial challenges, a 2,000-year-old lesson in what happens when the demand for luxury outpaces the limits of the natural world. These secret recipes were more valuable than any single shipment of dyed cloth. They were the intellectual property of the ancient world, and protecting them was a matter of economic life and death. The most closely guarded formulas, especially for Tyrian purple, were treated like state secrets. Rival empires and ambitious merchants would go to extraordinary lengths to steal them. There are accounts of Phoenician cities posting guards around their dye workshops, not just to protect the physical dye, but to prevent any foreigner from observing the exact fermentation process. Spies were dispatched disguised as merchants or laborers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the master dyer's technique or the precise timing of each step. The stakes of this industrial espionage were enormous. If a rival state like Carthage or a later competitor like the Byzantine Empire could crack the code for the perfect purple, they could break the Roman monopoly and drain a vital source of imperial revenue. Sabotage was an even more direct weapon. A rival might pay a disgruntled worker to contaminate a crucial vat of dye with the wrong chemical, ruining an entire batch worth a fortune. Or they could orchestrate raids on key snail harvesting grounds, disrupting the supply chain at its source. The capture of a major dye production center like the city of Tyre wasn't just a military victory, it was a corporate takeover that could shift the balance of economic power across the Mediterranean. How did the Romans fight back against this shadow war? They built a fortress of secrecy around their craft. The most critical knowledge was never written down. It was locked in an oral tradition, passed in strict confidence from a master dyer to a single trusted apprentice, often within the same family. This ensured that the full, nuanced process for creating the most vibrant and color-fast hues never left the workshop floor. When recipes were recorded, they were often written in coded language or filled with deliberate errors. A manuscript might instruct a dyer to add the shell of an egg, a meaningless step that would confuse any outsider trying to replicate the formula. This protected the true secret, which might be the specific type of salt used or the exact temperature of the water. Loyalty was enforced through powerful guilds. These associations of dyers and merchants controlled the trade, set prices, and policed their own members. Betraying a guild secret was the ultimate crime, punishable by heavy fines, expulsion from the profession, or even violence. The entire system was designed to make the craft mystifying and inaccessible. The loss of a single master artisan, whether to illness, rival poaching, or violence, could cripple a workshop for a generation, demonstrating just how fragile this brilliant, colorful empire truly was. A single bolt of purple cloth could legitimize an emperor or summon the gods. This was the profound power Tyrian purple held beyond the vanity of fashion, a pigment so deeply woven into the fabric of Roman life that it became a visible manifestation of authority itself. When a new emperor ascended, he was literally wrapped in this color. His official portrait was a painting on purple-dyed canvas, and his public appearances were dominated by the deep violet of his robes, a constant, brilliant reminder that he was the state incarnate. This was not a subtle suggestion, it was a visual decree. The imperial bureaucracy even used purple ink for the emperor's official signature, marking every decree and law with the literal color of his command. But the symbolism stretched far beyond the palace walls. On the battlefield, the legionary standards and the general's cloak were often dyed with purple. These were not just flags and garments, they were sacred objects. To follow a purple standard was to follow the will of Rome and its gods into battle. The color was believed to carry divine favor, a celestial blessing that could turn the tide of combat. In the realm of religion, purple was equally potent. Statues of Jupiter, the king of the gods, were often draped in purple cloth during major festivals. Priests and those performing sacrifices would wear purple-bordered garments, visually linking their sacred duties to the highest secular power. The color acted as a bridge between the mortal and the divine, suggesting that the emperor's power was not merely political, but was sanctioned by the gods themselves. How do you challenge a man when his authority is literally dyed into the fabric of reality? The early Christians living within this empire understood this language of power perfectly. As their faith grew from a persecuted sect to the official religion of Rome, They performed a remarkable act of cultural transformation. They adopted the imperial purple for their own high-ranking clergy, the bishops and cardinals. In doing so, they took the ultimate symbol of pagan imperial authority and repurposed it for a new divine kingdom. The purple that once represented the absolute power of a Caesar now came to symbolize the sacred sacrifice of Christ and the solemn authority of the Church. It was a symbolic victory as profound as any military conquest, a quiet revolution in color that echoed through the centuries. A Roman dyer in Britain would barely recognize the workshop of his counterpart in Syria. While the empire prized a unified standard of quality, the reality of dye making was a rich tapestry of regional specialties, each adapted to the local landscape and its unique resources. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the heartland of imperial purple, production was a state-run monopoly of immense scale. Coastal towns in modern-day Lebanon and Turkey were dedicated almost entirely to the Murex trade, their economies built on the stinking vats and shell middens we've already explored. This was high-stakes, centralized industry, producing a color destined for the emperor's court and the highest echelons of power. The dyers here were specialists in a single precious pigment, their methods refined over centuries to achieve that perfect, legally restricted violet. Travel west to the provinces of Gaul and Britannia, and the scene was completely different. Here, the climate was wrong for Murex snails, but it was perfect for growing woad and madder. Vast fields of the woad plant, a leafy relative of cabbage, supplied the empire's demand for a reliable, durable blue. The process for woad blue was its own kind of alchemy, requiring the leaves to be crushed, dried into cakes, and then fermented in a vat that produced a yellow-green liquid. Only when the cloth was pulled into the air would it magically transform into a steadfast blue. This was the color of the common soldier's tunic and the working man's cloak, a practical hue produced on an industrial scale to outfit a continent. Meanwhile, the rich red soils of Gaul were ideal for cultivating madder root. Gallic madder became famous throughout the empire for its deep, fiery reds, a color used for military insignia and the vibrant borders of everyday Roman dress. The expertise here was in agriculture and large-scale processing, turning tons of dried roots into a consistent, high-quality dye. Further south in North Africa, dyers exploited a different local resource, using the kermes insect, which fed on the native oak trees to produce a spectacular scarlet red. This was a different path to a similar prestige color, a clever adaptation that gave regions without access to the best madder their own valuable export. Can you see how this decentralized system worked? No single province could produce every color. Britain shipped its woad blue south, Gaul exported its madder red east, and the Eastern Mediterranean sent its priceless purple west. This interdependence created a vibrant economic network where a dyer in Rome could source the finest colors from the edges of the known world. Certain towns became renowned for their specific expertise, their names synonymous with quality. The reputation of a dyer from Tyrus for purple or a workshop in northern Gaul for red was a form of ancient branding, a guarantee of color that would not fade. This was not a monolithic imperial system, but a brilliantly interconnected economy of color, where local knowledge and resources fed a global demand, dressing the Roman world from the Scottish frontier to the Syrian desert in a brilliant, collaborative spectrum. That empire of color was not built to last forever. The same forces that held it together, the legions, the taxes, the vast trade routes, began to fray, and with them went the brilliant hues that defined Roman power. An empire buckling under its own weight could no longer afford the astronomical cost of its own prestige. The first crack was economic. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Roman treasury was bleeding gold to pay for endless civil wars and to defend its vast borders. This led to runaway inflation, a devaluation of currency so severe that the government resorted to desperate measures. They began to debase the coinage, melting down silver denarii and reminting them with cheaper metals. When a soldier's pay was suddenly worth a fraction of what it once was, the state had to find another way to pay him. Often they paid their armies in kind with rations of grain, salt, and, crucially, bolts of cloth. But this cloth was not the legendary Tyrian purple. It was the durable, practical red of madder root or the reliable blue of woad. The market for the most luxurious dyes, the ones that required a global supply chain, began to evaporate from the bottom up. Then came the invasions. As Germanic tribes pressed across the Rhine and Danube, They didn't just sack cities, they severed the arteries of commerce. The secure sea lanes that carried Murex snails from the Levant to Italian workshops became perilous, haunted by pirates and rival fleets. The overland routes that transported Gallic madder and Spanish kermes were cut by armies on the move. A dyer in Rome might have the skill and the recipe for imperial purple, but if the ships carrying the raw snails could not reach port, his vat stood empty. The entire system, a masterpiece of logistical precision, collapsed into a collection of isolated, struggling fragments. The Western Roman Empire's political fall in the late 5th century was the final blow. The central authority that enforced the dye monopolies, taxed the trade, and, most importantly, consumed the luxury products, simply ceased to exist. The aristocratic class that displayed its status through purple robes was either gone or impoverished, who was left to buy a color worth more than gold. The workshops along the Italian coast were abandoned, their lead vats scavenged for other uses, the secret knowledge of the master dyers scattered to the winds. Yet in the east, the story took a different turn. The Byzantine Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, became the new keeper of the purple flame. Here the imperial court maintained the tradition, and the production of Tyrian purple was once again centralized as a strict state monopoly. The famous porphyry chamber in the Great Palace, lined with panels of imperial purple stone, was where Byzantine empresses gave birth, ensuring their children were literally born in the purple. This phrase, born to the purple, survives today as an echo of that Byzantine obsession, but even their grip on the secret was tenuous. The prime Murex beds were dwindling, and the intricate multi-step process was vulnerable. As the centuries passed, the precise chemical knowledge faded, preserved only in a few monastic scripts or the minds of a handful of aging artisans. The rise of Islam and the Arab conquests of the 7th century further transformed the landscape. While the caliphates also valued luxury textiles, their cultural centers and trade networks lay elsewhere. The focus of the dye trade shifted, and with it, the economic incentive to maintain the old Roman industrial secrets. The formula for the true color-fast Tyrian purple, the one that could outlast the sun and the sea, slowly faded from memory, becoming less a lost recipe and more a half-remembered legend. The legend of Tyrian purple was almost lost to time, a ghost of a color that lived only in crumbling texts and faded mosaics. But in the 20th century, a new kind of quest began, one led not by emperors but by chemists and experimental archaeologists determined to resurrect the ancient secret with their own hands. This was not a search for treasure but for truth. The challenge was immense. The historical recipes from writers like Pliny the Elder were frustratingly vague, filled with ambiguous measurements and cryptic instructions. How exactly did you ferment the glands? For how many days? What was the precise salt-to-water ratio? The text offered clues, not a blueprint. The first step was to get the raw material, which meant diving back into the Mediterranean to harvest Murex snails, a creature that was no longer plentiful due to ancient overharvesting. Modern researchers had to carefully collect live specimens, often by hand, just as the ancient divers did. Then came the messy work of extraction. Following the historical accounts, they had to crack the shells and remove the tiny hypobranchial gland, a delicate operation that filled the air with that infamous, pungent odor described 2,000 years earlier. The real test began in the vats. Using lead pots and salt water, they attempted to replicate the slow fermentation under the sun. One of the biggest surprises was the color transformation itself. They watched as the initial yellowish liquid slowly shifted to green, then blue, and finally, after days of patient waiting, to a deep, rich purple. This visual confirmation was a profound moment, proving that the ancient descriptions were not myth, but precise chemical observation. These modern recreations faced constant hurdles. Sourcing authentic materials was a major obstacle. Modern sea salt is processed differently from ancient rock salt, and the mineral content of the water can drastically alter the outcome. Even the type of pot matters. A lead vat influences the chemical reaction in ways a glass beaker simply cannot replicate. Each failed batch, each unexpected hue, taught them something new about the dyer's art. A fermentation that was cut short might yield a reddish purple, while one left too long turned a murky brown. Through this painstaking trial and error, they gained a deep appreciation for the Roman dyer's skill. This was not a simple recipe one could read and execute. It was an intuitive craft. The master dyer had to judge the progress by the color's shift and the vat's smell, a sensory knowledge that took years to develop. The success of these projects did more than just produce a swatch of purple cloth. It validated the entire historical narrative. It proved that the Roman dye-making process was not primitive, but a sophisticated form of biotechnology. The ability to consistently produce such a vibrant and color-fast dye on an industrial scale was a staggering technological achievement, one we can only fully appreciate by getting our hands dirty and smelling the same foul air they did. These modern vats are a direct bridge to the past, confirming that the most brilliant colors of antiquity were born not from magic, but from a mastered, if malodorous, science. That ghost of a color never truly vanished from the world. It simply transformed, its power seeping from imperial togas into the coronation robes of medieval kings and the sacred vestments of cardinals. Long after the last Roman dyer forgot his craft, the allure of Tyrian purple persisted as the ultimate symbol of divinely sanctioned authority. In Byzantium, emperors were literally born in the purple, a tradition that gave us the phrase itself. When Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800, he was wrapped in purple silks, a direct and deliberate echo of Roman imperial might. The church, once a persecuted sect within the empire, became the new guardian of this chromatic legacy. High-ranking clergy adopted the purple once reserved for Caesars, weaving the color of earthly kings into the very fabric of spiritual power. A cardinal's robes were a statement that his authority came from a kingdom even greater than Rome's. But how could they produce this color when the ancient recipe was lost? The answer lies in a fascinating substitution. Medieval and Renaissance dyers, desperate to replicate the legendary hue, turned to a combination of cheaper dyes. They would first dye cloth with a base of blue from woad, then over-dye it with a brilliant red extracted from the Kermes insect. This layered process created a deep, rich violet that approximated the imperial shade, a clever chemical workaround for a lost art. This pursuit of color drove innovation for centuries. The quest for a more affordable and vibrant red, for instance, led to European exploration and eventual exploitation of the New World, where cochineal insects from Central America produced a red dye 10 times stronger than anything known in Europe. The entire tapestry of European fashion and art, from the deep crimsons in Renaissance paintings to the rich velvets of Baroque nobility, is stained with the legacy of Roman dye economics and symbolism. That legacy is experiencing a dramatic revival today, not in palaces but in the workshops of the modern sustainable fashion movement. The very problems the Romans created, the resource depletion and toxic runoff, have inspired a 21st century return to natural, plant-based dyes. Artisans and designers are now looking back to those ancient recipes, to madder, root, weld, and woad, seeing in them not a symbol of elite power, but a blueprint for environmental responsibility. They are rediscovering the subtle, living beauty of colors that come from the earth, hues that change with the season and the soil, each batch unique. This is not mere nostalgia, it is a profound shift in philosophy. The modern natural dyer, much like a Roman predecessor, understands that color is not a uniform chemical to be mass-produced, but a conversation with the natural world. She knows that the same madder root that dyed a legionary's tunic can color a modern garment with a warmth and depth that synthetic dyes cannot replicate. The secrets of Roman color, once guarded to uphold an empire, are now being shared openly to heal a planet. The thread connecting a Murex vat on the coast of Lebanon to a small dye studio in Oregon is 2,000 years long, a continuous story of how human ingenuity transforms the raw materials of the earth into meaning, prestige, and now, perhaps, hope. One of the most persistent myths is that Roman purple was a single, unchanging shade. The reality was a spectrum of luxury. While the deepest violet was indeed reserved for the emperor, dyers could produce a whole range of purples by tweaking their methods. The specific species of Murex snail used created a different base hue, with Murex brandaris yielding a redder purple and Murex trunculus producing a bluer one. The length of fermentation was another critical variable. A shorter soak in the vat with less exposure to sunlight resulted in a brighter, reddish Tyrian purple. Left to ferment for longer, the dye would deepen into that famous, almost blackish imperial violet. This means a triumphant general's purple cloak and an emperor's full toga were not the same color, but carefully calibrated shades within a prestigious family of hues. The idea of a single monolithic purple is a modern simplification that obscures the dyer's true artistry. Another common misconception is that the Romans relied on only one type of snail. While the Murex was king, it was not the only source. Archaeologists have found evidence of other mollusks being used, such as the spiny dye Murex and even the common dog whelk, especially in regions where the prized Murex was scarce. The industry was pragmatic, not dogmatic, using whatever local resources could produce a viable and profitable color. Perhaps the most romanticized falsehood is the notion of a simple, straightforward process. We imagine a dyer dipping a cloth into a vat of ready-made purple liquid, but nothing could be further from the truth. The production of Tyrian purple was a multi-stage, finicky biochemical fermentation that was incredibly easy to ruin. A sudden rainstorm cooling the vats, a contaminating insect, or a misjudgment in the salt ratio could destroy a batch worth a fortune. This was not a recipe for amateurs. It was a high-stakes craft where the master dyer's knowledge was the most valuable asset in the workshop. Finally, we often picture a uniform, empire-wide standard, but archaeological evidence tells a different story. A dye workshop in Roman Britain, using local whelks and different water minerals, would produce a purple that was distinct from one made in a state-run facility in Tyre. The Roman world of color was one of brilliant regional adaptation, not monolithic uniformity. These myths of a single snail, a single color, and a simple process diminished the incredible innovation and diversity of this ancient industry. The truth is far more interesting, a story of countless artisans across a vast empire, all experimenting in their vats to capture a small piece of the most powerful color the world had ever known. The true brilliance of a Roman dyer was measured not when the cloth first came out of the vat, but years later, after countless washings and endless days in the harsh Mediterranean sun. Their colors were engineered to endure, a technological feat that still baffles modern chemists. The secret to this legendary color fastness was a three-part formula, a sophisticated dance of chemistry, patience, and control. First, the invisible anchors known as mordants. Before any cloth ever touched a dye, it was often pre-treated with a chemical binder, most commonly alum. This crystalline salt created a molecular bridge, locking the dye particles permanently within the very fibers of the wool or linen. Without this crucial step, even the most vibrant purple would wash out into a dull, disappointing stain after the first rain. But the Romans did not stop with a single mordant. They were master mixologists, experimenting with different metallic salts to achieve specific effects. They used ferrous sulfate to darken and sadden colors, creating deeper, more somber shades. They discovered that tin salts could produce exceptionally bright, almost electric hues, a trick that made their reds and yellows truly spectacular. This was not guesswork, it was a refined, empirical science passed down through generations of artisans. The second pillar of their success was the use of multiple dye baths. Achieving that deep imperial purple was never a one-dip process. A textile might be dyed first in a vat of indigo or woad to establish a blue base layer. After it dried, it was then submerged into a separate bath containing the red dye from the kermes insect or madder root. This layering of colors, one over the other, created a complexity and depth that a single dye could never achieve. It also resulted in a far more resilient color, as the combined pigments were less vulnerable to fading from any single direction of the light spectrum. Finally, they mastered the element of heat. Precise temperature control was everything. A madder red dye bath, for instance, had to be kept at a consistent, warm temperature for hours to properly release its full, rich pigment. If the vat was too cool, the color would be weak and pale. If it was too hot, the dye would turn a dull, muddy brown. The master dyer constantly monitored his fires, judging the heat by the steam rising from the vat and the behavior of the bubbling liquid. This was a slow, careful art where rushing meant financial ruin. The proof of their success is not just in the texts, but in the physical objects they left behind. In the dry sands of Egypt, archaeologists have uncovered Roman textiles that have retained their madder reds and welled yellows for nearly 2,000 years. The vibrant frescoes at Pompeii, sealed by volcanic ash, still show the stunning blue of Egyptian blue pigment and the rich reds of cinnabar, a testament to the quality of the materials and the understanding of their properties. These surviving colors are not accidents. They are the direct result of a rigorous system of quality control and a profound chemical knowledge that allowed their brilliance to truly stand the test of time. While the emperor's purple commanded awe from a distance, the true color of Roman society was woven into the fabric of daily life. For the vast majority of people, expressing identity through color was a delicate dance of economic reality and social ambition, played out within strict legal and economic constraints. The soldier on the frontier did not wear imperial purple, but his wool tunic was consistently dyed a practical, durable red using madder root. This was not merely for uniformity, it was a calculated display of group identity and martial pride, a color that could hide stains and project strength, paid for by the state itself. The farmer's wife spinning wool at home might use inexpensive dyes from local plants to add a stripe of weld yellow or woad blue to her family's clothing. These were not the brilliant, color-fast hues of the elite, but they were a personal statement of care and identity, a small rebellion of color in a world of earthy browns and undyed off-whites. The law might forbid her a purple border, but it could not stop her from using the resources of her own land to create beauty. Archaeological evidence from common households shatters the monochrome image we sometimes hold. Excavations of modest homes and grave sites, from the ashes of Pompeii to settlements in Roman Britain, consistently reveal traces of dyes on textile fragments and in the residues of small, personal dye pots. These finds tell a story of widespread, grassroots engagement with color. A merchant's wife might own a shawl dyed with a cheaper lichen purple, a clever legal and economic workaround that approximated the prestige color without crossing into treason. A retired centurion could display his status not with Tyrian purple, but with the deep, rich scarlet of kerms on the trim of his toga, a clear signal of his achieved rank and personal wealth. The vibrant frescoes that adorn the walls of even middle-class homes in Pompeii are a testament to this love of color, reflecting a society that at every level saw the world in brilliant hues. This was a society where color was a language and everyone from the senator to the soldier was trying to speak. Roman dye vats were just one vibrant node in a vast, ancient network of color. The Phoenicians had been the original masters of the sea snail's secret, their very name a testament to their purple monopoly, but the Egyptians perfected the art of color on a different frontier, creating breathtaking blues and reds for their tombs and temples. They developed a synthetic pigment known today as Egyptian blue, a cooked mixture of silica, copper, and calcium that was one of the first man-made colors in history. Their mastery of plant dyes like madder and safflower was equally advanced, producing yellows and reds that have survived for millennia in the dry desert air. Far to the east in Han Dynasty China, another textile revolution was unfolding. The Chinese were pioneering the use of pigments from minerals and plants unknown in the Mediterranean, and they developed complex resist dyeing techniques to create intricate, multicolored patterns on silk. So how did these disparate traditions connect? The answer lies in the slow, steady movement of merchants and armies along the Silk Road and other trade arteries. A Roman merchant in a Syrian marketplace might see a bolt of Chinese silk dyed with a unique shade, prompting him to ask questions. A Phoenician dyer, seeking new opportunities after Rome absorbed his homeland, might bring his specialized knowledge of Murex fermentation to a workshop in Italy. This was not a formal technology transfer, but a slow seepage of ideas, a cross-pollination of techniques driven by profit and curiosity. The Roman genius was not necessarily an invention, but an industrial scaling and ruthless commercial application. They saw the economic and symbolic power in the Phoenician purple, the Egyptian blue, and the vibrant reds of other cultures, and they systematized their production on a scale the ancient world had never seen. Can you trace the routes in your mind, the overland caravans and sailing ships that carried not just spices and silk, but the very secrets of color itself? This demand for Roman dyes, especially the legendary purple, in foreign markets became a powerful tool of cultural influence. A Germanic chieftain wearing a cloak trimmed with Roman purple was making a statement about his connection to that distant, powerful civilization. A Parthian noble furnishing his home with textiles dyed with Roman madder red was participating in an aesthetic defined by Rome. The color on their backs was a silent ambassador, spreading Roman taste and reinforcing the idea of Rome as the center of the luxurious, civilized world. The exchange was not entirely one-sided, of course. The Roman palette was undoubtedly enriched by the dyes and techniques they encountered, adopting and adapting them to create the rich, complex spectrum that came to define their empire. The story of Roman color is therefore a global story, a testament to how human ingenuity, when connected by trade, can transform the resources of the earth into a universal language of power and beauty. Even with all we have uncovered, the Roman dyer's vat still holds onto its deepest secrets. We can replicate the color, but the full living craft remains tantalizingly out of reach. What precise incantation of heat and time transformed that foul mucus into a specific crimson purple versus a deep violet? The written recipes are maddeningly vague, and the oral traditions died with the last masters. We know they used multiple mordants, but which exact combinations produced the legendary shades that have never faded? The identity of these artisans is another profound silence. Who was the genius who first discovered that stale urine could fix a matter red, or that fermenting woad in a specific way would yield a truer blue? These innovators are anonymous, their brilliant experiments lost to history, their stories untold. Perhaps the greatest enigma is the full range of their palette. With their vibrant colors they created that we have not yet even identified, hues that disappeared entirely when the workshops fell silent. The potential for discovery is what makes this field so electrifying. A newly unearthed workshop, perhaps preserved in the mud of a riverbank or under the sands of North Africa, could hold pottery shards with intact chemical residues. Advanced spectroscopic analysis could then read those residues like a recipe book, revealing not just what they used, but the precise order of their steps. Imagine analyzing a fleck of purple from a buried textile and finding the chemical signature of a plant additive no one knew they used. Such a find would rewrite our understanding of their technical prowess. The search continues, a collaborative puzzle where historians, chemists, and archaeologists piece together fragments of the past. Every new scrap of evidence has the power to illuminate another facet of this brilliant, colorful world, proving that the story of Roman dye is far from finished. The story of Roman dye making is ultimately a story of power, written in color, from the imperial purple worth more than gold to the madder red of a common soldier's tunic. These colors formed a visible language of status that defined an empire. The secrets pulled from sea snails and humble roots did more than just dye cloth. They fueled a vast economy, enforced social hierarchies, and projected Roman authority across the known world. We have traced the journey from the stinking vats on a distant shore to the sumptuary laws that made a specific shade an act of treason. This was an industrial-scale alchemy that balanced brutal efficiency with astonishing chemical intuition, a testament to a forgotten kind of genius. The legacy of these ancient colors stretches far beyond the fall of Rome, influencing the coronation robes of kings and the sacred vestments of the church, their symbolic power echoing for centuries. What does this enduring fascination teach us? It reminds us that human innovation often blooms in the most unexpected places, that the pursuit of beauty can drive both great achievement and profound exploitation. It shows us that luxury is never just about the object itself, but about the story, the scarcity, and the sheer human effort woven into its very fibers. The true secret of Roman dye was not just a chemical formula, it was the understanding that color is a force that can build empires and outlast them. We would love to hear which part of this colorful mystery captivated you the most. Was it the astronomical cost of Tyrian purple, the clever chemistry of the mordant, or the global trade networks built on a single shade? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the ancient world, subscribe for more journeys into the secrets history left behind.